a look.
Helps having a couple other former South Carolina players on this roster to kind of help ease in and ease that transition?
Yeah, it has helped. I think other people too. Sophie Cunningham, Caitlin Clark, Lexie, Kelsey Mitchell, they all great people to be around. They help me when I don't know things. They know the system really well, so I ask them a lot of questions.
Pay attention to what just happened there. Raven Johnson was asked about acclimating to the Indiana Fever, and she immediately name-dropped Caitlin Clark among the veterans helping her adjust. That's significant. Music. This is the same player who spent years as Clark's college rival at South Carolina, and now she's publicly praising her in front of cameras on day 2 of training camp. The fan reaction to this draft pick was brutal. Social media exploded when the Fever selected Johnson, with thousands of fans questioning why they'd bring in someone who had such intense on-court battles with their franchise player. So, the question everyone's asking is this genuine team chemistry, or is this just good media training?
Camp, she seems pretty well media trained, and her answers were nothing but positive.
Getting to know everybody last week.
Oh, it was good. I learned from a lot of the vets here. I was listening. They were giving me, a good welcoming. They were telling me how training camp was going to be. I thought it was very competitive. But it felt good to be here, honestly, and to play with these talented women.
The whole just vibe.
Pretty good, pretty.
Notice the phrasing here. She's not just saying generic things about the team, she's specifically calling out the veterans by name, talking about asking questions during practice, and describing actual interactions. That level of detail suggests real engagement, not scripted responses. But here's what makes this situation fascinating. Raven Johnson won Defensive Player of the Year in college. The Fever already have established defensive players. They have Lexie Hull, and they have Aliyah Boston, who can protect the rim. The pick didn't fill an obvious roster need, which is why the backlash was so intense. Fans wanted shooting, they wanted veteran presence, they wanted someone who could immediately contribute to a playoff push. Instead, they got a defensive specialist who's known for her rivalry with their star player.
Which is always smiling, bubbly, always making people laugh, which I do that. I do a great job of that. So I think I'm in the middle.
Steph talked about, City specifically this year. What do you think, obviously, as Defensive Player of the Year, you can bring to that?
Yeah, my defense tenacity. I'm like a gnat on the ball. Every time when I get the defense, I want to be the person to turn people over and give my teammates extra possessions to shoot the ball or whatever that may be. But yeah, when it comes to...
Watch her body language in that clip. She's smiling. She's animated. She's describing herself as always smiling, lovely, music, always making people laugh. That's either authentic personality coming through, or it's incredibly polished public relations work. Either way, it's a stark contrast to what many fans expected based on her college reputation. The Fever are making a calculated bet here. They're betting that Johnson's defensive intensity translates to the professional level. They're betting that her chemistry with Caitlin Clark can flip from rivalry to partnership, and they're betting that the fan base will eventually come around if the results show up on the court. That's a lot of betting on a second-round developmental
which is
pick.
getting defensive stops.
And listen, I'm not trying to be overly positive here. If on that court she doesn't look right, I'm going to call it out. I just think that at this point in time, she just seems very happy to be there, and I can only imagine.
There it is. I'm a net on a ball. That's the identity she's bringing. She's not trying to be a scorer, music. She's not trying to compete with Clark or Kelsey Mitchell for offensive touches. She's carving out a specific role as a defensive disruptor, someone who creates extra possessions through turnovers. The question is whether that role is valuable enough to justify the roster spot. The WNBA only allows 12 active players. Every single spot matters. And when you're a team that was in playoff contention last season, using a pick on a developmental defensive specialist instead of someone who can contribute immediately to winning is a risk. The Fever clearly see something in Johnson's potential that made them willing to take that risk, despite the fan backlash.
Slot, and the reason she's been added to the developmental slot is because they wanted to be able to keep her to develop her, because they would most likely have to cut her at this moment in time. She might not be WNBA ready, but I can see a world where someone like a 6'4" wing that can shoot from beyond the perimeter would be worth investing in. So I think having her in that developmental slot was tactical. Looks like she's ready for the switch right there. Gets her arms up for the nice contest.
Now, let's talk about what we're actually seeing on the court. Justine Pissett, the Fever's second-round pick, has been placed in a developmental slot. That's significant because it means the Fever acknowledge she's not WNBA ready yet, but they see enough long-term potential to invest in her development. She's 6 feet 4 inches with serious wingspan. In these training camp clips, she's showing decent lateral movement and defensive positioning. Compare that to Johnson's situation. Johnson wasn't placed in a developmental slot. She's competing for an active roster position, which means the Fever believe she can contribute right now. That's the difference between a long-term project and someone expected to play meaningful minutes this season. The pressure on Johnson is completely different. She needs to prove she belongs on an active roster, not just that she has potential.
I knew this is where I wanted to be. I've been here for 4 seasons, and I feel like we had a great momentum last season. We're able to accomplish more than we had in the past, and I think for me, I just want to keep growing on that, building on that, and building with this group. I mean, the fans are great. From the moment I got here my rookie year, even though we didn't have the best year on the court, they welcomed me with open arms. Someone from the West Coast didn't have a lot of people here.
Listen to Kelsey Mitchell's reasoning here. She's talking about family vibes, about relationships she built with the core players. That's the culture the Fever have been building. They went from being one of the worst teams in the league to playoff contenders in 1 season, and a huge part of that was team chemistry. Adding Aliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark created instant connection because of their college success. The veterans like Mitchell bought into supporting the young core. Now, they're asking that same culture to absorb Raven Johnson, someone who doesn't have those built-in connections, someone who actually has a history of intense competition against their franchise player. Mitchell re-signed because of the family atmosphere. The question is whether Johnson can integrate into that family, or whether her presence disrupts what they've built.
This place feels like home, and it's just continued to feel more and more like home the last few years.
And here are some highlights that the Indiana Fever posted to their socials with some offensive sets that are always fun to watch. Positive vibes, positive vibes. All right, Lexie 3-ball, that's what we want to see more of this season. Sophie at the wing. It's her spot.
Lexie Hull is saying the same thing. She's from the West Coast, had nobody in Indiana when she arrived, and the fan base made her feel at home despite rough on-court results her rookie year. That's the environment the Fever have cultivated. They've created a situation where players want to stay, where free agents choose to return even when they could get paid elsewhere. But here's the tension. That welcoming culture exists largely because of the fan base's passion, music, and investment in the team. And right now, a significant portion of that fan base is actively opposed to the Raven Johnson pick. They're not hiding it on social media, they're not being subtle about their concerns. So, Johnson is walking into a situation where the organization is telling her she's welcome, but a vocal segment of the fans who create that welcoming atmosphere are skeptical at best, hostile at worst. Here's what this situation really comes down to. The Indiana Fever have built something special over the past year. They went from lottery team to playoff contender, they sold out games, they created genuine buzz in a market that had been lukewarm on women's basketball. Caitlin Clark's arrival was the catalyst. But it wasn't just about one player, it was about the entire organization committing to building around young talent, creating team chemistry, and engaging with fans in authentic ways. The Raven Johnson pick tests all of that. It tests whether the front office's talent evaluation is strong enough to override fan skepticism. It tests whether the team culture is resilient enough to integrate someone with a complicated history with their star player. It tests whether Johnson herself has the maturity and self-awareness to navigate an incredibly awkward situation with professionalism. Based on these media day interviews, Johnson is saying all the right things. She's praising Caitlin Clark specifically, she's defining her role clearly as a defensive specialist, she's projecting positive energy and a team-first mentality. But media day interviews are controlled environments. The real test comes when the games start, when the pressure mounts, when defensive rotations break down, and someone needs to be accountable. The Fever are betting that Johnson's defensive instincts are elite enough to overcome the awkwardness. They're betting that her ability to pressure ball handlers and create turnovers will be valuable enough to justify the roster spot. They're betting that whatever happened between her and Caitlin Clark in college stays in college, that both players are professional enough to prioritize winning over personal history. That's a reasonable bet if you look at it purely from a basketball perspective. Johnson was Defensive Player of the Year in college for a reason. She has legitimate skills. The Fever's defensive rating needs improvement if they want to make a deep playoff run. Adding a defensive specialist who can hound opposing guards makes strategic sense, but basketball doesn't happen in a vacuum. Team chemistry matters, locker room dynamics matter, fan support matters. And right now, Johnson is starting from a deficit in all three areas. She doesn't have the built-in relationships that other rookies might have. She's walking into a locker room where she has to prove herself to veterans who are protective of Caitlin Clark. She's facing a fan base that's already decided she was the wrong pick before she's played a single minute. The comparison to Justine Pissett is instructive here. Pissett was also a second-round pick, also a developmental project, but there was no controversy around her selection because she didn't have baggage. She's just a 6 feet 4 inches wing with potential who needs time to develop. The Fever put her in a developmental slot, fans accepted it, and everyone moved on. Johnson doesn't get that luxury. Every practice clip, every media interview, every preseason minute is going to be scrutinized. Music. What's interesting is how the veterans are handling this. Kelsey Mitchell talked about family vibes being why she re-signed. Lexie Hull emphasized how welcoming the organization and fan base have been. They're not directly addressing the Johnson situation, but they're reinforcing the culture they've built. That's either a subtle message that Johnson needs to fit into the existing culture, or it's a reminder to fans that the Fever take care of their players regardless of how they arrived. The training camp footage shows Johnson working hard, engaging with teammates, and projecting positive body language. That matters. Music. Coaches notice who's asking questions, who's staying late for extra work, who's bringing energy to practice. If Johnson can establish herself as someone who makes her teammates better through effort and attitude, the skepticism will fade. But if there's even a hint of tension, if there's even a moment of awkwardness with Caitlin Clark that gets caught on camera, the narrative will explode. Christy Sides, the Fever's head coach, has to manage this carefully. She needs to give Johnson opportunities to prove herself without alienating the veterans or the fan base. She needs to define Johnson's role clearly so there's no confusion about expectations, and she needs to monitor the team dynamics to make sure this doesn't become a distraction that derails what they built last season. The reality is that the Fever don't need Raven Johnson to be a star. They need her to be a reliable defensive specialist who can give them quality minutes without disrupting team chemistry. That's an achievable goal if everyone buys in, but it requires Johnson to be humble, coachable, and self-aware. It requires the veterans to be welcoming despite any reservations, and it requires the fan base to give her a fair chance to prove herself on the court. So, was this the right pick? We won't know until the season plays out. If Johnson becomes a defensive stopper who helps the Fever improve their defensive rating and make a playoff run, the skeptics will look foolish. If she struggles to find minutes and becomes a distraction, the critics will say they knew it all along. Right now, we're in the uncertainty phase, where everyone's projecting their hopes and fears onto a situation that hasn't been resolved yet. What we can say is that Johnson is handling the media pressure well so far. She's not defensive, she's not making excuses, she's not avoiding the elephant in the room. She's acknowledging the situation, praising her teammates, including Caitlin Clark, and focusing on what she can control. That's mature, that's professional. That's exactly what the Fever need from her if this is going to work. The next few weeks will be telling. Training camp will reveal whether Johnson can actually defend at the WNBA level. Preseason games will show whether she can execute in game situations, and the team dynamics will either gel or show cracks. The Fever have created a situation where they need Johnson to succeed, not just for basketball reasons, but to validate their decision-making and maintain team harmony. For fans who are still skeptical, the question is simple: are you willing to give her a fair chance? Because if she's on the roster, she's a Fever player. And if the Fever are going to compete for a championship, They need everyone pulling in the same direction. That includes Johnson, that includes the veterans, and that includes the fan base. The alternative is a divided locker room and a toxic atmosphere that undermines everything they built last season. So, watch what happens next. Watch how Johnson performs in preseason. Watch how Caitlin Clark interacts with her on the court. Watch whether the defensive intensity she's promising actually translates to results, and then decide whether the Fever made the right call, because right now, it's all potential and projection. The real story gets written when the games start counting.